Well, hello. Before we start, I'd like you to think about the following scenario. When you open a web application and click on a button, or type into a form, or see information update instantly on your screen, one wonders, how does the application know what to display and when to display it? Well, in Angular, the communication between your application logic and your user interface happens through something which we call data binding. Well, last time we focused on setting up your Angular development environment and create our first Angular project. We also looked at how your Angular application is structured and how components form the basic building block of any Angular application. Now that we have got a working project and also an understanding of what a component is, the next big question becomes, how does a component communicate with the UI or the user interface? Well, in Angular, the user interface is defined in a template which is written using a language called HTML. However, the data and the logic of the application lives inside a component class written using a language called TypeScript. For the application to work correctly, there is need to have the following: data from application component to appear in your template, and the template to react when the user interacts with the interface. Angular solves this by using a powerful concept known as data binding. Okay, so today we want to focus on three core bindings that Angular templates builds on. First one being interpolation, which is used to display data from the component in the template, and property binding, used to set properties of HTML elements dynamically. And the last one is event binding, which is used to respond to user interaction, such as click and input. So the first data binding which we are going to talk about is interpolation. But before we do that, let us understand the following. Well, do you still remember the first video we did in this tutorial series? We talked about every Angular application having a bootstrap application line, which bootstrap your app component, and in this case here, which will eventually become our root component. And from there, the root component will then have a tree of components. Well, this is exactly what is happening here. Every Angular application starts from the main TS file, which has got this line here, the bootstrap application line. Now, this line here tells Angular to start the application using the app component as a root of the application. Think of this as a turn-on engine that tells Angular to load your framework, to read the app config file, and to start the app using the app component. Okay, now from here, the app component is now our root component of the entire application, as seen in our index.html file here. In the index.html file, Angular finds this tag here and replace it with our app component UI. So let's quickly jump onto the app component UI, see what we've got there. So in the app component UI uses the app.html template, which then, let me quickly go there, which then loads the template, this template here, which is a custom component which I've just created, and renders its components. Right now, if we go to this component template, you will see that it has got nothing except this phrase here. So that will be our next topic which we want to look at. Okay, so let's get back to data binding. Remember earlier on we said that there are three ways of doing data binding, and we're going to start with the first one, which is interpolation. Now, in order for us to do so, you will notice that I've created my own component, which is called my component. And in this component, we have got our template, our styling file, and our TS file here for business logic. So let's do a very simple example of how you can apply interpolation. Bearing in mind that interpolation is used to display data from your component to your template. Now, with me here, I've just declared three properties, which is username and age, and I want to display these values of this property in my template. So I will go to my template, then I'll declare a div tag, and within that div tag, I'll then use interpolation for my username. Yes, and I'll do the same. I'm just going to copy and paste, and then replace this with edge. Now you can see here, if I refresh my browser here, it will now display these two here. We save my work first and refresh. There we go. That is what we call interpolation. Interpolation is to display data from our component into our template. All right, so if you have seen in our previous demo, Angular replaces the expression with the actual values from our component. Here are the advantages of using interpolation. Number one, it is simple and it is readable. Interpolation is extremely easy to understand. This makes the template clean and beginner friendly. Number two, it is perfect for displaying text. Interpolation works very well for rendering dynamic text content. Number three is that it automatically updates. Whenever the component data changes, Angular automatically updates the UI. The disadvantages of using interpolation are as follows. The first one is that it's limited to text content. Other disadvantage is that it's not suitable for complex logic. When your template is we've got heavy logic that needs to be displayed, interpolation is not the way to go. Now, one might wonder, when should I use interpolation and when should I not use it? Okay, so you can use interpolation when you need to. Number one, display data or display text value, show a number or a string, render a simple expression. Okay, so that's the first data binding. The next data binding that we're going to look at is property binding. Okay, so the last time we spoke about interpolation, now we want to talk about property binding. Now, property binding allows Angular to set properties of HTML elements dynamically. So I'm going to use this example here of these two buttons here. One, I'm going to set it to enable, and then the other one, I'm going to set its property to disable. So if you look at I've already set up my two buttons here, and I need to declare a property inside my class. So I'm going to declare it as is disabled and set it to default, which is false. So to now apply property binding, I need to save my work first. I need to go to my template and then use one of the button property, which is disabled. And then this one here, I'm going to set it to the initial values, which is false. So disabled. And then the other one, I'm going to set it to the opposite of that, which is not false, which means that this one is true. Save my work. And then you will notice now the second one is saying that our button is indeed disabled, and then the first one is saying our button is not disabled. So with this, I've managed to manipulate the elements of our HTML tag itself. It's different from the first one, whereby we are rendering data. In this case here, we are binding the property of our HTML element. So here are the advantages of using property binding. Number one, it allows you to control elements behavior by setting such things as disabled, source, value, hidden, and so on. Number two, it is essential for dynamic UI. Modern web application requires dynamic interfaces, and property binding makes it possible. And number three, it keeps template declarative. Instead of manually manipulating your tool, Angular handles updates dynamically. Now, we cannot talk about disadvantages without talking about disadvantages. Here are the disadvantages of property binding. Number one, the first one is it is slightly more complex compared to interpolation. Beginners get confused with the difference between properties and attributes. Now, HTML attributes and DOM properties are not the same, which can at times confuses other developers. For example, an attribute disable and a property disable, these are totally two different things. Now, when to use this or when to use property binding? You use property binding when you need to. Number one, set elements property dynamically. Number two, controls the state of your UI. And number three, bind values like source, disable, check, value, etc. That's all on property binding. The next type of data binding that we're going to talk about is event binding. Okay, so the last data binding technique that we're going to look at is event binding. Event binding allows the template to listen to the user action and call the rightful method. Now, to perform this, you will notice that I went on to add two more buttons, one for increasing our edge and then the other one for decreasing our edge. Remember, we had a property that we set here as edge, which holds the value of our edge as defined in our class. So when you click on the button for increase, we would want to increase the edge. When you click on the button for decreasing, we would want to decrease the edge. So in order for us to do so, we're going to head back to our class where we're going to add two more methods. The first method that we want to add is the increment method. And then we also want to create another method, which is edge decrement. Now in our first method, which is the edge increment method, we want to refer to this edge, which is our property that we have declared above here, that has got a default value of 30, and we want to increment by 1. So we're going to say plus plus, and we terminate our statement. We will do the same in the decrement method, but this time instead of saying plus plus, we will say negative negative, because we want to decrement by 1. Save your work. Now, because this is an event binding technique, we will have to add an event on our button here. So we will then go on and open our brackets, and then the moment you open your bracket, you will see a whole lot of events. The on play event, the cancel event, the can play event. There are so many. In this case, we want to use the click event so that it listens to a click on our button. Now, if we click on a button, we would want to call edge increment method. That's what we need to do here. Then we will also do the same on the decrement. We would want, when you click on it, we would want to call the edge decrement method. When you have this, then save your work. I think we're good to go. Let's go and test it. So when you click on it, we would want to increase, and then this one is for decrementing. So we are decreasing dynamically and we are increasing dynamically. That's event binding for us. Up next, we're going to talk about the advantages and disadvantages of event binding. All right, so for advantages of event binding, number one, it enables user interaction. It allows Angular application to respond to clicks, keyboard input, mouse event, and form submission. Number two, it keeps the logic in a component, meaning that all logic stays in TypeScript component. By doing so, we are keeping our template clean. Number three, it supports many DOM events. Examples includes the click event that we have just used, the input event, the change event, the mouse over event, the key up event. Well, as for disadvantages, too many event binding can clutter your template. If you overuse, the template may become harder and harder to read. Another disadvantage is that it can trigger frequent change detection. Events can cause Angular to run change detections, which may affect the performance of your application if it gets bigger. Now, one might wonder when to use events. So when you want to use event, you use event binding when you need to, number one, respond to user interaction, number two, call methods, number three, update component data. Now, as for our summary, I'm going to compare the three using three topics. Number one, the binding itself, the type of binding itself, the purpose, and the direction. Now, when we talk about interpolation, the purpose of this type of binding is that it displays text, and the direction is always from the component to the template. Whereas the property binding, it sets element properties, and again the direction is from component to template. The last one, which is event binding, it handles user action, and this time the direction is a bit different. It is from the template to the component. Now, for our final conclusion, the three Angular binding techniques form the core communication mechanism between your component and your template. Whereas our interpolation, it displays data, our property binding controls the element of your property, and our event binding handles user interaction. When used correctly, they help you to create a clean, maintainable, and reactive user interface. Mastering these three binding is the first major step towards understanding Angular template and component interaction. Thank you for watching this tutorial. We'll see you again in the next tutorial.